We are here with Russ, Mikaela, and myself, Josh. And Mikaela, we've had a lot of great conversations before. I know that we've talked way back when, and now we're talking again. But ultimately, for us, do you mind quickly introducing yourself, your name, including your sport, and also the school or university that you attended?
My name is Mikaela Celeste. I also go by Mika. I think my Zoom name is Mika. Yeah, that's probably confusing, but obviously soccer nickname. Can't say Mikaela on the field, it's too long. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California in Los Angeles, specifically Pasadena, and I went to college at the University of California, San Diego. So kind of been in SoCal for the majority, actually my entire life, pretty much. I played Division One women's soccer. We kind of had a unique situation at UCSD. We started in Division Two my freshman year, and then by my sophomore year, the entire school transitioned to Division One. So then we went into the Big West Conference.
Looking back at your time at UCSD, how did your journey as a student athlete shape you both personally and as an athlete?
Yeah, I mean, so many ways. Being a student athlete was who I was my entire life. It was my identity. I think whether or not you want it to, it really has an effect on who you are, who you want to be, who you hang out with, who you look up to, what you do. I think even from a very young age, it taught me a lot of responsibility and where I should allocate my time in order to be successful and achieve certain goals. So like even early on in high school, I was making a lot of sacrifices to be able to get to the Division One women's soccer level. I think that was my goal, and I was like, I need to go to sleep here. I need to make sure I'm ready for my tournaments on the weekend. I need to give up hanging out with these friends or doing this thing. I need to prioritize school. How can I kind of like work on getting good grades? I went to a pretty like academically rigorous high school as well, private school, so it was tough for me. I didn't always feel like the smartest kid, and it was like, how do you kind of combine everything and make sure that you're succeeding and like firing on all cylinders? And it totally shaped who I am, in so many different ways. And honestly, I mean, just who my friends are, who I value in my life, like coaches throughout my upbringing totally shaped what my values are and kind of what I think is important today. And moving on into college as well, it was a completely different experience. I think we talked about this, Josh, kind of on our first call, but for me, like growing up, soccer was a lot more of like I really love the sport and it shaped, my friends and who I was. But then by the time I got to college, it was more about like you're learning so many things about how to work with people, how to be on a team, how to succeed in a setting maybe where you're uncomfortable, maybe where it's too much and you're spending too much time with all these people. And it was sort of like athletically, I developed all the way up until college. And then college was like, okay, I'm actually figuring out who I am outside of soccer, which was like a super weird and interesting and complicated transition that involved a lot of different things. But I would say totally like shaped who I am. I wouldn't be who I am today without athletics and the people that brought me athletics. So I think whether you want it to or not, if you become a collegiate athlete, it kind of just becomes a lot of who you are.
Looking back at specifically more so the college period for yourself, I
Mhm.
know firsthand how hard it is to balance academics and athletics, right? You're not there just to, play soccer. You're not there just to get a degree. You're there to do both at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And that's a very, very, very demanding task. But ultimately for you, was there any really skills or different things that you really tried to deploy within your day-to-day life to help balance the academics with the athletics?
I was actually a double major, so I took a lot of classes and I'd practice at 7 a.m. every morning. So there was a lot of sacrifice there. Our typical schedule was like Monday through Saturday, or even like our off day would be Mondays on like in season. So it was just kind of like a weird thing. Like a lot of the time you had to give up those social things a lot of time in season, like it's dry season, so you can't even go out. Like you have to like follow all of these really weird rules. I mean, it's interesting because in college, I feel like your priorities are a little skewed because you want to do a lot of the social things because that's what everyone else is doing and you want to be involved and you want to have that college experience as well. So you don't want to like miss out on things and you don't want to be like just your sport and you don't want to be just your major or whatever. So I think it involved a lot of different things for me. For me, like for one, I always prioritize sleep. Like I knew that I had to get up around 5 or 6, depending on whether you had to, get physical therapy before, like whatever you were doing before practice, or 6, and then you're basically just getting there at 7. We had to drive to campus. So for me, I was like very much prioritizing sleep. And one thing that came as a challenge with this was roommates. This is always a difficult thing. Like you want to live with your best friends, but maybe they're not the best roommates. And that was like a struggle for me for a long time. And it was like my wall shared a wall with the bathroom. So like people would be in there like super late, and it was just like a whole thing. So obviously I prioritized sleep, but it was still like a really difficult thing for me to get. Also prioritizing my time, like my junior year, I also worked part-time the entire year on top of my majors and soccer. And I think it was just about like finding the right windows for myself. And honestly, you learn a lot in those situations too. Like sometimes you get caught up and I remember like this one time, like I hate like missing things or being like not on time, and I missed a meeting and I felt horrible about it. And like it just still haunts me. So like I learned a lot about myself, like how are you going to remember that you have this meeting? How are you going to organize yourself? What are you going to do? So it's all about like writing things down. Like for me, I like to do like a lot of things on the computer, but I'll always have like a paper list of like my to-dos for the day. And I think that was really helpful, like having something that I could always revert back to. And then if I had something that I needed to put on it, I could just get out a pen, write it down. So I think for me, like visually making sure that I had everything kind of to do, and then I was prioritizing my sleep. So it's like, how are you going to plan things throughout the day to make sure that you can get everything you need to get done, and then like, continue with your schedule and make sure that you're able to go to sleep on time, all these things. I think it was definitely a learning process, and everyone has different processes. Like my friends are totally different. Like people would just stay up all night doing work or partying or doing whatever. Is completely different for everyone, and it works differently for everyone. But for me, it was like I'm a planner. I plan things out, and like to the point where like where can I be most productive? Like for me, it's like, okay, if you're working on a task and you get fatigued, switch to a different one. And then like, keep going back and forth to make sure you're like keeping your brain fresh and like keeping your mind fresh. And it's like learning how to study, learning how to take notes. Like honestly, it's weird because I've learned so much in my job so far that like doesn't a lot of it doesn't pertain to like what I learned in college. But the one thing that has been so helpful is taking notes, like learning how to take notes effectively and making sure that you're writing down what actually needs to be retained is so key. And it's like totally translating into my job now. My boss literally told me you are like developing like a great note-taking style, because like it's just so important to have these things. So it's like it's the simple things, but how are you, what's your style of learning? Like which way do you learn best? And then how can you incorporate that into your schedule to make it productive, to make it efficient, to make sure that you're retaining the most information possible in the shortest amount of time? Because it's all about that. It's like you don't want to be sitting there for 4 hours and not retaining anything, you're not getting anything done. So it's like really finding out your way of being productive. And I think college did a lot of that for me. Like I was able to just like figure out, because of sports and because of, the double major, like I was able to figure out what ways I learned best, what ways I took notes the best, what ways I studied the best. And then from there, I could like incorporate that into my planned schedule. And then I was able to get everything done and just like not have to worry as much. And the quarter system is really fast as well. Like we had 3 quarters instead of 2 semesters. So it was just like making sure you're keeping up with your work so you don't fall behind, and like making sure you're understanding the information along the way so that when the final comes around, you're not trying to learn everything the night before. It's like, okay, like make sure that you grasp things on a weekly basis. So then when the final comes, like you're cramming, but not as much as you would have if you like didn't show up to class. Also, I think that's one main thing is like people don't show up to class in college, especially when you go to a huge college like UCSD. And that is like going to give you such a leg up, because you're just going to like, even if you force yourself to be there, like I think it's more useful to get the information in and kind of like let it pass through your body, even if you have to like go back and review the material. Like just kind of sitting there, being present, making sure that the teacher knows you're there, like all that stuff kind of helped me learn as well. It's just like making sure that I was doing the things that I was supposed to be doing. I was checking them off the list, and that kind of worked the best for me.
How important do you believe mental health is for athletes, and how has it played a role in your athletic career?
I think it's super important. I think everyone kind of says this and no one really takes enough action on it. I think everyone, no matter what, goes through stuff in college athletics. Like whether it's one thing or another, whether it's your personal life, like I had two teammates who went through like very like family deaths, like things like that. It's like, and that affects the entire team. You know, it was just like crazy stuff, unexpected stuff. And all of that is just like super present. Everyone goes through different things, and there's so many different levels that it can be on, like where you need help, like with your mental health. Like it's just a different scale for every single person, and it's hard to target that the way that sports does. Like for us, we had a mental health person basically that would come and like talk to us at practice. And it's like, how is this help, like, you know, how is this helping me? Like there's like, I understand that you're like giving us certain advice, but it's like it's just not applicable to every single person here, and everyone has totally different things that they're anxious about or that they're worried about or that, you know, they have going on their personal life, or if they're stressed about soccer. It's like not everyone has mental health issues related to the same thing. So I thought the way that we dealt with it, it's almost like we're trying but not in an effective or efficient way. And unfortunately, I did not go through really anything that was very hard before I got to college. And then, like, in the middle of college, it all of a sudden got really hard. And, like, we can touch on that a little later. But I needed that support so badly, and I did not get it from anywhere. Like, I mean, my friends, my parents, like my parents were a huge resource, like my friends as well, but I mean, some of my friends were terrible resources when it came to like helping me out with my issues, and like my coaches were terrible resources. Like it was like when I really needed someone, I had no one to turn to, and I felt like genuinely I did not know a single other person who like was going through the same thing as me, like that was my age. So it was just like, unfortunately, I have to say, like mental health was a huge part of me like discovering my identity and becoming like the person I am in college. Like I discovered all of that through college athletics, but unfortunately, like I did not feel that I had great support surrounding it, even though I think people were trying, just in the wrong ways, if that makes sense.
How did you go about overcoming those challenges, those hurdles, those injuries? And then also, how did it affect you from kind of a mental wellness, mental health standpoint after that challenge?
So I'll just start with what the injury was. So it was kind of weird, my college experience overall, because freshman year was great. You know, we were also coming off like our last year in D2, like we won everything. It was awesome. And like, you know, I got freshman of the year for my conference. Like I played super well. It was great. And then like sophomore year was like going fine, but like COVID hit. So like then we all had to go home, and it was like a completely different thing. And I think that sort of like kind of switched my body up a little bit. Like my body was kind of confused at what was going on, and it was just like totally changed up from my normal schedule. So obviously COVID happened, we kind of went through that year, and then coming back my junior year of college, it was about a week before we started preseason. So this is like August, you know, it's hot, whatever. Like I was training, doing my normal things. Obviously, like soccer training involves a lot of running. And I was starting to notice that like I couldn't really breathe. And I was like, I had a super high resting heart rate. And I was like, what is going on? And I went to a bunch of people, and they're like, oh, you're probably just anxious. And, you know, season starting, it's post-COVID, like whatever. So I was like, okay. And then I finally, you know, like got my heart checked out, got my blood work done, and basically found out that I had a thyroid problem. And then it took me like, I mean, this was all into season as well. So it took me like about maybe a month and a half to finally see a thyroid specialist, which is an endocrinologist. And she basically looked at my labs for like a second and was like, you have an autoimmune condition called Graves' disease. And I was like, the heck is that? Like, I don't know. And like, she was like, literally, how did no one tell you this before? Like, this is so obvious. And I was like, you tell me, I've been confused for like 2 months. I can't breathe. And like, it was just so bad. And basically, I had this condition called Graves' disease where like there's like this gland in your neck that produces hormones, thyroid, and basically mine was like super high performing. So basically like when you have an autoimmune condition, like your body is just attacking itself for no reason. And my body was just like producing an insane amount of hormones for no reason. And basically what I needed was medication to kind of like regulate that process. But the issue is the medication takes like 4 to 6 weeks to kick in, even like a little bit. And the recovery time, like basically like to fully recover from the condition, the time is like 2 to 5 years. So like picture me going into my junior season post COVID, so excited, and then it all literally comes crashing down in my face. And also, of course, no one wants to break my heart and tell me that it's gonna take me like years to heal. So I just keep like saying like, oh, you'll feel better in about 2 weeks. And what I didn't know that was like my levels were so like off the charts that I mean, it was like I had problems for the rest of my career. Like my junior season, my senior season, obviously I didn't take a fifth year just because I had to like prioritize my health, but like had continuous problems. I mean, honestly, it took me to like finishing college to actually sort of feel normal. Like I just dealt with like a higher resting heart rate and like the issues that came with the thyroid condition for basically my last 2 years. And it was like it's really what also doesn't get talked about is the fact that injuries that aren't seen, like an ACL, like is seen, an ankle is seen, but injuries that aren't on the surface, everyone just acts like they're not there. So basically the doctors were like, you can practice, but I couldn't breathe. Like my heart rate was at like 210 during warm up, which is like the maximum that you should like ever be. And like it was literally like I was gonna collapse on the field. And like no, everyone was like, you're fine, you can practice. So eventually I just had to be like, I can't practice. Like I have to sit out. And it's like so mentally draining when like physically you're okay, but then well, I mean, I wasn't okay physically, but I looked okay physically. And then you're just having this like detrimental like pain inside and like you're having to watch everyone like do everything that you can't do. And it's like I've literally not only waited like had to wait the process of like actually having the injury, but I mean, COVID was a year before. So it was like I couldn't even play soccer that entire year. So it was just like terrible timing, like probably just brought up because of like stress and those sorts of issues. And that was just like, I mean, it was so hard. Like, it was so hard for me to grasp that, like, I couldn't just get better. Like, I really had to just wait. Anytime I changed my medication, it was just a waiting period. And I literally went from 5 mg all the way up to 35 milligrams. And now I take 2.5 milligrams. So, like, you could imagine the scale that, like, my body went through. Like, it was just like, at one point I was too high, and then I was hypothyroid, which is the opposite. And you underproduce hormones and you feel like sluggish and terrible and depressed. And, like, it also is like totally an emotional condition. Like, you feel anxious and depressed, like either way you're going. I mean, it totally changed everything. Like before college, I was just a blank slate, like nothing bothered me. And then after having that injury, it was like everything bothered me. Like I couldn't just like I was just having such a tough time. Um, and like honestly, a lot of my like personal relationships also came to the surface. It was like whether people really cared about me, whether they did or they didn't. And it was like at that point, I lost some friendships because people were just like so terrible about what was happening to me and were like just not there to provide support and did like awful things. So it really was like a turning point of like, all right, who am I going to be outside of soccer and how am I going to like be resilient and deal with this injury? And I mean, so many things since I got diagnosed, like a million things I've had to go through. And I mean, just all over. Just having an autoimmune condition, it's just like things pop up, and like whether that's problems with your gut or like with your, mental health, anxiety, like just those sorts of things, like things just pop up every which way. So it like totally changed who I was. And unfortunately, it was really hard for a very long time during college. And I felt like I was struggling. And a big part of it was that like I didn't know a single person who had been through it. On top of that, playing high intensity soccer with it just didn't really seem possible. And I was struggling a lot with that because I just felt like alone and no one could see what was going on. No one really understood it because when I explained it, people nod and then they're like, okay, move on. You know, like no one gets it and like no one gets how you're feeling. And my coaches didn't help. So it was just really hard. And honestly, it's taken me a long time to overcome it and like own it and kind of become who I am. But generally mentally very taxing while I was a student athlete. But I mean, I did like graduate the program. I did make it through. So there's just some part of like perseverance that got me through that. But yeah, it was just like super hard.